All right, guys, back with another edition of the Sports Rundown podcast. I guess we can go ahead and jump right into it. Starting with the NFL, Saints win without scoring a single touchdown versus the Cowboys. Final score was 12-10. Dak Prescott was 22 for 33 with 223 yards and one interception. Ezekiel Elliott was limited very much by the Saints defense. Had 18 carries for only 35 yards and one touchdown. The only touchdown of the game, I mind you. Teddy Bridgewater had 23 completions on 30 attempts, had 193 yards and one interception. Saints as a team had 27 carries for 117 yards. What's y'all's take on the Saints versus the Cowboys game?
Well, I mean, you saw the Saints defense step up, which we knew they were going to have to do. Dallas came into this game with the top scoring offense of the NFL. Given they didn't play that good teams for the first 3 weeks, we saw they put up close to 500 yards per game, and they were putting up a massive number of points. So it's good to see that despite the Saints being criticized on their secondary, specifically Eli Apple, they were able to come out, shut down the very hot Cowboys offense. And they also got 3 turnovers, or they forced 3 turnovers, I should say. So credits to the defense on that great win. Also credits to Will Lutz. I mean, guy came in 4. You can't ask much more from your kicker on that one.
Yeah, you got to give it to the defense on that one. Like you said, we got Sheldon Rankins back on the D-line after that Achilles tear he suffered earlier this year. Von Bell had a huge game. He had 10 tackles, a forced fumble, and 2 recoveries for the Saints. That was big, that turnover margin for them. And like you said, I mean, the Cowboys had one of the best offenses in the league right now. They had the NFL's third-ranked running attack, averaging 179 yards, and scored no fewer than 31 points, and we held them to 10. But they definitely met their match. We were only able to get to Dak, we had 1 sack. We had some rushes, so we'd like to see a little bit more aggression from the pass rush. Marcus Williams did have that interception thanks to Gardner Johnson's rush at the end of the game when Dak threw it in the air. But like I said in the earlier podcast, I believe the Saints would get past the Seahawks and possibly lose to the Cowboys. But it's even better now that they beat the Cowboys, and they should be able to win out the rest of the games until Breeze gets back and be in great shape for the second half of the season.
All righty, on to the next game. Rams lose to Tampa Bay. Offensive matchup right here. Final score was 55-40. Tampa Bay winning. Jameis Winston was 28 for 41, had 385 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, Jared Goff, he was 45 for 68, had 517 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Todd Gurley only had 5 carries for 16 yards for 2 touchdowns. Now, Todd Gurley, you think he's the workhorse of the Rams. He only had 5 carries the entire game in a 55-40 offensive showing. Do you think the Rams are kind of moving towards the pass game and not relying on Todd Gurley too much, or do you think it was just in the game plan versus Tampa Bay?
Well, Tampa Bay did have that very weak secondary, so I feel like LA was trying to exploit that weakness as much as possible. I mean, we saw Goff throw the ball close to 50 times, right? And he did throw 60. Oh, wow. It's even more. So he did throw 3 interceptions, so he did show a little signs of fatigue there towards the end, making some bad passes. But, I mean, we saw him put 500 yards through the air. And if he's putting that many numbers up through the air, let him keep working. I mean, I know Todd Gurley's been, like you said, one of the workhorses for their team ever since he's been drafted. But if the pass game's working, let the young quarterback throw the ball. I mean, it's working out well for him so far this season.
Yeah, the Rams have always been pretty decent running the ball, obviously, with Todd Gurley. Their misdirection and play action is what ultimately separates them from the other teams. But in this game, they quickly abandoned that run game after getting down 21-0 with 8:28 in the second quarter. The Tampa Bay's defensive front got pressure early, and Shaquille Barrett was able to get his 9th sack of the season. tying 3 other ladder players for the most sacks in NFL history through a team's first 4 games. So that's huge for them. I mean, this guy was a guy that was not drafted. He was cut by a former team, and then now he's with the Bucs. So big performance for him. But if you look at Jameis Winston, first couple games for him were really shaky. But Bruce Arians in that new offense, he's really getting a hold of it. He has progressed in the past 2 weeks, done really good job. But it's a guy that everybody likes to beat up on, especially after the inconsistent play earlier this year and the Bucs going from Winston to Fitzpatrick last year. But ultimately, those 55 points that they scored comes from Jared Goff turning the ball over. They abandoned the run. He had to throw the ball all game to get back into the game. He had 3 interceptions and a fumble. So as a Saints fan, it's fun to watch the Rams lose to a team that's not up to par, especially what happened last year. But on the other side of things, the Buccaneers just beat the defending NFC champions, and the Saints play them next week. So a little bit of doubt for them. They're going to have their hands full. Hopefully a good game plan put together, and the defense will stifle their offense. The good news is that they play Tampa at home, which is a huge home field advantage for them, as we've seen in the past. And hopefully Bridgewater and the Saints can get that offense going.
On to the next story. Vontaze Burfict had that big hit, helmet-to-helmet hit on Jack Doyle, the tight end for the Colts. The NFL laid the hammer down, and they suspended him for the rest of the season. Now, if you don't know much about Vontaze Burfict, this is not his first time. This is his 4th suspension, once for PED and 3 other for helmet-to-helmet hits or unnecessary roughness hits. He's had $5 million lost between salary and fines from the suspensions. Now, he's been fined or suspended 12 times in 7 years in the NFL. He's known as a guy that he plays. I mean, I don't want to say he plays dirty. He just plays. I guess you could say he plays that old school football. You know, the NFL rules are changing to where the helmet-to-helmet hits are being very closely watched. You know, like I said, he's been fined or suspended 12 times in the last 7 years. He's lost $4,622 in salary from suspensions and $411,000 in fines. So it's not his first rodeo, but the fact that he can't, I guess you can say, correct his performance, correct against the rules, I believe he should be suspended for the rest of the season. While he can appeal, I believe it is the right move by the NFL.
I mean, we first saw Vontaze Burfict pop up into the scene in, I believe, the 2015 AFC divisional round where he was still on the Bengals back then. He had that nasty hit against Antonio Brown that actually cost the Bengals the game. It put the Steelers in a field goal range, which allowed them to win. So it's not only detrimental to just him, but it's detrimental to his team, not necessarily just because of his talent, but just the repercussions season-wise. I mean, that cost the Bengals their season. You know, they still haven't won a single playoff game under Marvin Lewis, or they never did. But he's been popping up here recently with some more of those big hits. And like you said, I don't want to say he's a dirty player, but he's just been popping up way too much for anybody's liking for these types of hits.
Yeah. We all like physical old school football, but 12 times, you know, it gets to the point where, you know, maybe this guy just doesn't care. You know, if you look at some of these hits, some of them are after the whistle. Some of them are really vicious hits. You know, I think it makes you kind of wonder, you know, is he doing it on purpose? And at this point, you know, I mean, some people were begging for him to be banned from the league. So, you know, after this one, I don't know what it's going to take. You know, he obviously doesn't care about losing money. He obviously doesn't care about getting suspended. But I don't know how long that the NFL will be able to let this keep going. I mean, you're putting not only himself at risk with those head-to-head hits, as we saw when he hit Doyle. You know, he laid in the middle of the field for a while, you know, getting up. And he probably has a concussion. So hopefully that's what the NFL has been trying to do is get rid of those hits. You can keep it clean and hit hard, but there's a certain way you got to go about it.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to point out is it's not only the helmet to helmet hits, because you can argue, he wasn't paying attention, he was just going in hard and things like that. But there's been certain instances where I can't remember who, but he would, after the whistle is blown, he would twist their ankles. Up, it was don't quote me on this, but I believe it was Ben Roethlisberger and Le'Veon Bell for the Steelers. But they've been having ankle injury, ankle problems the entire season, and he would twist their ankles trying to hurt them and prevent them from going on to, going on with the rest of their season. So you can argue some of it's dirty. You can argue some of it's, whatever you want to say about it. But definitely a big time thing, because it's the first time that anybody's ever been suspended for the rest of the season for this helmet to helmet kind of, I guess you could say, penalty. So yeah, I mean, you got to adapt. You can't sit there and continue to perform like that. If you're going to keep getting fined and keep getting suspended, you're going to eventually have to adapt, or you're just going to have to get kicked out. So I guess we'll go on to the next story. Top fantasy performers.
Starting off at the quarterback position, top fantasy performer with 29.3 points at quarterback was Jameis Winston. We talked about him a little bit earlier. He was 28 of 41, 385 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Next up at the running back position, leading ahead was Nick Chubb. Had a huge game with 39.3 points. And by the way, this is PPR standard scoring. He had 20 carries, 165 yards. His longest was 88 yards. I don't know if anybody saw that, but he broke loose, and, man, nobody was going to catch him. Along with those 3 touchdowns, he had 3 catches and 18 yards. And I also put in Leonard Fournette, 26.5 points, a little bit less than Chubb, but he had a career-high 225 yards on 29 carries, longest being 81 yards. Fournette's been struggling with with injuries when his ankle. We saw that at LSU. Hadn't been really the same guy with the Jaguars. So it's good to see him get back in and get some good runs. Next up, at the receiver position, Chris Godwin, also with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, had 41.2 points. He had 12 catches, 172 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I just want to add in the receivers. Man, there was a lot of receivers, had a bunch of huge games. Robert Woods for the Rams had 29.4 points, 13 catches, 164 yards, didn't score a touchdown. And then Devontae Adams had 28 points. He had 10 catches, 180 yards. Longest was 58. This was his biggest game of the year so far. And also, Jarvis Landry had 24.7 points, 8 catches, 167 yards. His longest catch was 65 yards. Go ahead.
One thing I do want to point out, though, about, the wide receiver position in fantasy is, you saw this with, you pointed out Robert Woods and Chris Godwin, but it's when their quarterbacks perform is when the wide receivers perform. Winston had 385 yards and 4 touchdowns. He hit Chris Godwin a lot. Jared Goff was 45 for 68, had 517 yards and 2 touchdowns, hit Robert Woods a lot. So, and you saw this earlier in the year too when Patrick Mahomes was performing. You saw this with Sammy Watkins and Demarcus Robinson. When your quarterback performs, your wide receivers are going to perform. Now, it kind of sounds obvious, but most people in fantasy don't really think about that. Is if you have a good quarterback, you're going to have a good wide receiver. So that's one thing I wanted to point out, though, is if your quarterback's going to have a good game, your wide receiver is going to have a good game. But go on, Tyler, with the rest of the top fantasy performers.
Yeah, that's right. Good quarterback play. I mean, pretty much that'll set the tone for the whole team. You know, the whole team usually will have a good game, and like with the Tampa Bay and the Rams game, you know, with Jared Goff throwing 60-something times and Winston throwing 41, those receivers are going to have big numbers, being that they're going to catch a lot of balls and get a lot of yards. Anyways, moving on to the tight end position, Austin Hooper had 22 points. He had 9 catches, 130 yards for the Falcons. Man, this guy, he's been lighting it up lately. He seems to be, I don't want to say he's ahead of Julio, but here lately and recently, he's been getting a lot of their targets. And then I also have a little sneaker at the tight end position. Reason being, I'm in a 12-man PPR, and talent's hard to find there on the waiver wire. Well, luckily I picked this guy up. I have Zach Ertz on my roster, the Eagles tight end. Well, I've been dealing with a lot of injuries, you know, needing a flex player. Will Disley for the Seahawks had 18.7 points, 7 catches, 57 yards, and a touchdown. A week ago, the Seahawks traded away Nick Vannett, and it's very clear that the team views Disley as the only tight end on their roster. So far, he's delivered. He scored for a third straight game in Week 4 and seeing a season-high 8 targets. The second-year pro out of Washington is emerging as one of the top tight ends of fantasy, and there's no reason to doubt that he'll continue to be a part of the Seahawks offense. Seattle plays the Rams this Thursday at home, which I believe will be a high-scoring game. So if you have or had the chance to pick him up, he's only rostered in 67.4% of leagues. He's averaging 15.3 points a game, so I'd get him in your lineup immediately.
So now on to the MLB. The playoff picture is set. The NL and the wild card games are happening right now as we speak.
Yeah, we saw in the National League wild card, the Nationals ended up defeating the Brewers by a final score of 4-3. We saw the young man Juan Soto get the game-winning hit for them. And as we're doing this podcast right now, the AL wild card is happening. It's 5-1 in favor of the Rays right now over the Athletics in the top of the 7th. So right now, looking like the Rays are going to move on to face the Astros in the AL Divisional Series. But also in the ALDS will be the Yankees and the Twins will be the other 2 teams playing in their side of the ALDS. The winner of the National League wild card, the Nationals, will play the LA Dodgers in their side of the NLDS, and the other 2 teams playing in the NLDS will be the Atlanta Braves and the St. Louis Cardinals.
Yeah, with the Twins and the Yankees, it's the year of the home run. It's fitting to call it that because these 2 teams have cracked 300 home run barrier and will face off in an ultimate home run derby in this series. The Twins had a record 5 players top 30 home runs, led by Nelson Cruz with 41. The Yankees have power up and down the lineup with Gleyber Torres leading the team with 38. They also got Giancarlo Stanton back after he missed most of the season earlier this year. I think the Yankees have the edge in the bullpen, but Minnesota's top 3 of Taylor Rogers, Trevor May, and Tyler Duffy all had an ERA under 3. And veteran Sergio Romo has 3 World Series rings. The cloud that hangs over the Twins franchise is that they've lost that divisional series to the Yankees in 03, 04, 09, and 2010. And the Twins have lost 13 straight playoff games since the first game of the 2004 divisional series. And just for that reason, I have the Yankees winning this series. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, like you said, they've got power up and down the lineup. You also didn't mention the likes of Aaron Judge and Gary Sanchez, both big power threats for the Yankees. And they do have a very good starting rotation pitching-wise. So I feel like I'm going to have to agree with you on that. Yankees, I feel like Yankees take this ALDS series in 4 games.
Next, we got Houston versus what would be the wild card winner, which we believe is going to be the Rays. The Astros enter the postseason as the World Series favorites for obvious reasons and to figure to have a huge advantage over that wild card winner, which would eventually be the Rays. Justin Verlander, Garrett Cole, and Zach Greinke form an imposing rotation trio. Their powerful offense ranked 3rd in the majors in home runs, 1st in batting average, and 1st in lowest strikeout rate. The bullpen had the 3rd best ERA in the league. They rank fourth in defensive run saves. Also on that roster is Alex Bradman, who is an MVP candidate this year, and Michael Brantley and rookie slugger Jordan Alvarez provide help from the left side that the team lacked a year ago. This is a team without a weakness, and it begins the postseason in better health than last season. Although Carlos Correa's back could be a concern for them, either way, I think the series goes to the Astros in 4 games.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. Talking about the Rays, though, their starting rotation isn't very good. You know, they got that top 2, Blake Snell and Charlie Morton, who they were acquired from the Astros over the postseason, or in the offseason, excuse me. I don't think their bats are powerful enough to overtake the Astros in this series. The pitching is just too overwhelming. I feel like it's going to be too overwhelming for the Tampa Bay lineup, and I feel like their bullpen is a little weak too. So up and down, I feel like Houston is just going to bat around on Tampa Bay and just score a bunch of runs. And yeah, like you said, I'm gonna say Astros in 4.
And now with the National League side of things, we got the Cardinals and the Braves. The Braves have won their most games since 2003. Depending on the big 4 of Freddie Freeman, Josh Donaldson, Ronald Acuna Jr., and Ozzie Albies on offense, and their solid pitching staff led by rookie Mike Soroka and free agent Dallas Keuchel. They had some bullpen additions at the trade deadline, which I think strengthened what would have been their weakness. The Cardinals, on the other hand, have transformed their shaky defense to a pretty good one with the keep a ball in play approach. But they'll be put to the test against the Braves' long ball hitters. They got some guys that can put the ball out of the park, hit the gaps. They've been pretty spectacular with their run prevention, with the error total that is one of the lowest that's ever been recorded. Their hitters have been befuddled by off-speed and breaking pitches, resulting in an offense that's underachieved at the top line and been really inconsistent. So for that reason, I have the Braves winning this one.
Yeah, talking about the Braves, they got a lot of young talent in their lineup. Like you mentioned, Ozzie Albies and Ronald Acuna Jr., and they also got some veterans like you said, Freddie Freeman and the bringer of rain himself, Josh Donaldson. Donaldson had a little bit of a shaky start once he came to the Braves. Didn't do that well with the Blue Jays either after coming over from Oakland. But he's definitely found a home here in Atlanta. He's gotten a feel for that bat again. He's still doing well on defense. And Atlanta hasn't had much to cheer about baseball-wise since probably the late 90s when they had that insane top 3 pitching staff rotation. The only thing they had to cheer for in the early 2000s was probably Chipper Jones. And like you said, they haven't really made it to the playoffs very much in the past decade, really. So I feel like this young talent, along with the veterans that they have in that lineup, will probably lead them to a ALDS victory. I'm taking Atlanta in 5.
And in the last National League division game, we got the Dodgers and the Nats, who just won that wild card game. But the Dodgers won a franchise record 106 games. But no team faces more pressure after 2 straight World Series losses and a tough matchup with the Nationals. The Nationals don't have the best offense this year, but perhaps the most diverse and with a very powerful pitching rotation. But their bullpen could end up hurting them. Little weak spot for them. But for the Dodgers, they own the NL's best fielding ERA. They rank second in strikeouts and allow the fewest walks and fewest home runs. So that's pretty big for them. If you're not giving away free bases, you're going to save yourself a lot of runs. They also lead in defensive efficiency. I think this series could go a long way in deciding who comes out on the top of the National League this year. But I do have the Dodgers winning the series.
Yeah, I'd have to also agree with you on that one. We see a lot of people on the Dodgers that have just been breakout this year. I mean, Cody Bellinger has been doing well for the past couple of seasons, but we saw Max Muncy, who has really developed into a better player than he was last year. And we also see that Dodgers pitching rotation. We all know about Clayton Kershaw, but a Cy Young candidate, one of their pitchers is Hyunjin Ryu, who's been doing very well this season, has a low ERA. I feel like the Dodgers have more experience in these playoff games. Once the Nationals got rid of Bryce Harper, everybody thought that the Nationals were just going to tank. But they've got that young talent in their minors farm, and they brought a lot of them up. Like I mentioned earlier, Juan Soto, who's performed very well for the team this year. But talking about their pitching rotation, they've got Max Scherzer and Steven Strasburg, who have been the heart of that team for about 8 or 9 years now. So I feel like we're going to see more of a pitching battle between these two teams. They both got some very good starters in their rotation. I'm going to take the Dodgers in 4 in this one.
So, breaking down the playoff picture, saying in the ALDS, you have Astros and Yankees. In the NL, you have the Dodgers and the Braves. So, going off of that, who do y'all see in the World Series, and who do y'all think will win it?
I honestly see another Houston-LA matchup in the World Series. We saw them in 2017. It was a great series. I mean, they had that one game going to, 14 innings? So I feel like it's probably the best matchup that's going to come. These two teams are definitely the biggest powerhouses of their division, both pitching and offense-wise. I definitely think it's going to be Astros and Dodgers, but I feel like the Dodgers are going to shake off that slump, and they're going to take it home in 7.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. According to ESPN.com, Houston is the favorite to win the World Series with a percentage of 33%, and the runner-up to be the Dodgers at 26%. So I feel like that rematch would make a good series and be a good sequel, especially for the Dodgers. Also impressive for them to make 3 World Series straight if they do get to that point. But I'm going to take the Astros because also, according to ESPN, they're ranked as having the number 1 lineup and pitching staff, in which I totally agree with. I mean, they're powerful throughout the whole lineup. They got a great pitching staff, so, I mean, they're going to be pretty tough to beat.
Now, with me, I like the Braves, so I want to go the Braves versus the Astros. And again, I'm going to agree with Tyler right here. I'm going to say the Astros win it. While I do see the Dodgers probably taking this one, I kind of want the Braves to go into the World Series. But again, I do see the Astros winning it all, whether or not they play the Dodgers or the Braves. If they play the Braves, I see it going to 5. If they play the Dodgers, I see it maybe going to 6 or 7. But Astros, I definitely see them winning it. Like Tyler said, with a great pitching rotation, a great lineup, young talent throughout with Alex Bregman and Carlos Correa. I would not be surprised to see the Astros win it. So, on to the next story. Tyler was saying, it's been a record season for the MLB. The MLB as a whole set a single season record for most home runs, which is 6,776 home runs in a season. The Twins set the single season record for 307. 14 teams set the franchise record. 24 teams with 200 plus home runs.
I mean, yeah, like you said, the players have just been getting a feel for that ball. I think they juiced it a little bit, but with this influx of home runs, the MLB commissioner Rob Manfred's been talking about doing something to make the ball not travel as far. But I say let them keep hitting. I mean, we're looking back towards the Gorilla Ball days of the 90s when you had Barry Bonds hitting 73 home runs in that one season. Guys like Sammy Sosa that were hitting 60 almost every year. I enjoy seeing this very offensive type of baseball. I'm sure pitchers don't, it's running their ERA up. But as a fan of Major League Baseball, I enjoy seeing a more offensive game.
Yeah, I agree with you. And like you said, it's not helping their ERAs. The Orioles alone gave up 300 plus home runs this season. So I know the Orioles pitchers aren't very happy with that. But going on to pitchers wise, and 2 pitchers that haven't been struggling are Garrett Cole and Justin Verlander for the Astros. They both hit 300 strikeouts in one season. This is the second time two teammates have done it. Randy Johnson and Kirk Schilling did it for the Diamondbacks back in the 90s. But we were talking about it earlier. The Stros just having that unbelievable pitching rotation and that unbelievable offensive lineup. Um, a very, it's a very history making season for the MLB. We can go ahead and go into the next story. Another MLB record was broken. Pete Alonso for the Mets sets the rookie home run record with 53 home runs in a season. Just a lot of pitchers doing well, a lot of hitters doing well. Do y'all have any comments on the season as a whole for the MLB this season?
I mean, it's just been an exciting thing to watch. We saw the Red Sox go from World Series champions to not even cracking the playoffs, and the possibility of losing Mookie Betts at the end of the season. Like you said, it's been very exciting to watch all these long balls leaving the park. A lot of players have been stepping up at the plate. There's been a lot more offense that's been generated league-wide, not just on certain teams. But other than that, it's just been a really exciting season to watch. Excited to see what happens in the postseason, see who ends up making it to the ship in late October.
So that'll do it for the MLB. Next up, we'll have the NBA. Season's about to start in a few weeks. What teams are y'all excited to see? Mine personally is the Pelicans. Had a lot of offseason moves, picked up Zion in the draft. I'm just really excited to see the Pelicans, that new offense with Zion, Lonzo, and a lot of different players. I believe the Pelicans, a lot of hype going into the season for them. But what about y'all? Who are y'all excited to see?
Personally, I'm excited to see both LA teams, Clippers and the Lakers. I'm sure everybody's excited to see the new look Lakers. They're going to have LeBron running point guard this season. They also picked up Anthony Davis in that monster trade, and they also have DeMarcus Cousins. Although he got injured, he's expected to be back later in the season. So I'm excited to see that big three coming up in the Lakers side of LA, but also for the Clippers. They brought in Paul George and reigning NBA Finals MVP Kawhi Leonard. First time ever a reigning Finals MVP has left his team the season after winning an NBA Finals. So I'm kind of excited to see how they both fare in LA. Both teams fare in LA. Clippers have been kind of trending upwards over the Lakers because the Lakers haven't been doing too hot in recent years. We know back in the early 2000s, the Lakers controlled LA, but I feel like both of these teams are going to do really well. They're going to be competing for that top team in California.
Yeah, and there's another team flying under the radar, the Brooklyn Nets, hauling in an elite duo, KD and Kyrie, back with, even bringing in a center guy, DeAndre Jordan, is going to be a big team. I don't know about y'all, but I think it's going to be a big run at the playoffs whenever that comes around.
Yeah. I'm a huge LeBron fan, so I'm not afraid to say that I follow him to every team he goes to, but I'm going to have to say the Lakers here. The other day at practice, they were reported that their starting rotation would look something along the lines of Rondo at point, Danny Green at shooting guard, LeBron James, Anthony Davis at the power, JaVale McGee at center. They can do a lot of different things with their lineup. It really hurts to see DeMarcus Cousins go out with that, I believe, was a torn ACL. So it kind of hurts. We won't be able to see DeMarcus Cousins get to play in that lineup this year, and maybe never, just because he was signed to that one-year deal. But this is a veteran lineup, besides Anthony Davis. Rondo's been in the league. He has his rings. I believe Danny Green has won in San Antonio, and he won last year with Toronto. I think LeBron they'll have a good season. They'll thrive. They can do a lot of things with their lineup, like I said before. And you still got the guys that remain from last year with Kuzma, Caldwell Pope. They brought in Avery Bradley. And I think another team, one more, is the Rockets. Harden and Westbrook team back up. That's going to be fun to watch. Old teammates. Everybody goes back and thinks, wow, what could have happened had KD, Harden, and Westbrook stayed together. All these guys are stars now in the league. So I look for it to be a fun season. We got a bunch of duos out there, a bunch of super teams, talent spread out. So hopefully it'll be a good season for the NBA.
Alrighty, on to NCAA football. Clemson, former number one ranked team, almost loses to unranked North Carolina Tar Heels. 21-20 was the final score. UNC went for 2 to win the game because it was a smart decision, honestly, if they could have converted. Because Clemson outranks them talent-wise, coaching-wise. But they just didn't convert on the 2 to win it. So, big-time close game right there for Clemson. That knocks Clemson to number 2. Alabama moves to number 1. And surprisingly enough, LSU, on their bye week, which they did not play, drops down to number 5. They're out of the top 4. So the top 5 is looking like Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, and LSU. So any comments on that?
Yeah, no, not to be surprised with LSU. LSU has been being mistreated by, the people who rank the teams. But really, they didn't even get a chance to play, and yet Clemson almost loses to a team that's not even close to being in the top 5, even the top 10. I just don't understand it. But there's a lot of teams out there that you kind of consider they say an underdog and whatnot. I think that boosts LSU's confidence going into the week with something to play for and to prove.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back up. Resume with Clemson in that UNC game. Obviously, Clemson's not the same team last year, and even their head coach had mentioned that. It's like every year. This is college football, so your rosters are going to change. You're going to lose guys to the draft. You're going to lose guys to seniors, to transfers, to injury, whatever. But Clemson's not the same team. Trevor Lawrence has not played very well at all. I had Clemson. They could have been upset earlier this year. This game I picked going into this week for them to lose this game to North Carolina. They got very close. But like Chandler said earlier, I think it was a good call to go for it, obviously, because, you take that chance of going to overtime with Clemson, them being the better team, them being more experienced in big games like that, they probably would have came out of there. But at the same time, the way that game was going, Clemson was a 27-point favorite, and you're playing them with 1 point. Why not just kick the field goal, tie the game, and bank on stopping them or going to score ball and winning the game, So could have been a lot of different ways that game could have played out. But I'm just glad that the committee allowed Alabama, as much as it hurts for me to say, to jump to number 1, because Clemson has not – they've only beaten one ranked team. And by the end of the season, Texas A&M could fall out of the rankings, by the end of the year. So if you look at it that way, they wouldn't even have had beaten a ranked team. But Alabama's obviously the best team right now. Their defense hasn't been the strongest as we've seen in recent years. They gave up 30-something to Ole Miss last week. But their offense is phenomenal. With Tua, Henry Ruggs, Um, all those guys are phenomenal. And then with LSU, I don't believe. I mean, so we start off at numbers. What number did we start off at?
7, I believe, 7 or 6.
We start off at number 7. We beat Texas, which would have been the number 9 team at the time, I believe. And you move us up to number 4 and let us drop on a bye week when we've got the highest scoring offense right now. Defense, now don't get me wrong, the defense is not there. There is some injuries that need to be taken care of, but fact of the matter is, I mean, if you look at Ohio State, who jumped us, they haven't even played anybody. They beat Nebraska, and you're going to move them up. Doesn't make sense, but at the end of the day, these rankings don't matter. It won't matter until the end of the season. LSU will have plenty of opportunities after this Utah State game. You're going to have number 10, Florida, and you're going to have number 7, Auburn. And then eventually in November, you're going to have Alabama. So their time will come. If they're meant to be in that top 4, they'll have to prove it. It's going to be pretty interesting to see what plays out between Auburn and Florida. Big-time matchup. Either way that goes, whoever wins that game is going to move up. So we'll be looking at a top 10 game in Tiger Stadium coming the next couple weeks.
All righty, on to the next story. Big news coming out of California. The Fair Pay to Play Act was signed and went into the Constitution. Now, some people are confused about it. Now, they say the schools will pay them this and that. Da 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 da. No, it's not like that. Basically, the act will say the schools can't revoke the scholarships or eligibility if they make money. If they sign autographs and things like that. Because we saw Johnny Manziel get in trouble a few years ago when he was signing autographs and getting paid for it. The school, like I said, the schools won't pay them, but the athletes themselves can hire agents to seek out business deals for them. So kind of like with Zion last year, Gatorade signing to a deal now that he's in the NBA. But if he hired an agent, he could have gone out and said, "Hey, let's get this Gatorade deal," and could have been making money in college. Now, this doesn't go into effect until 2023. So I'm a freshman in college now, so that won't go into effect because it goes into effect January 1st, 2023. So I believe we'll be out of college by then. So it'll affect the freshmen going in now. So the class of 2020, they'll see the first glimpse of it, and this is all in California. The NCAA says and I quote, "We will consider next steps in California while our members move forward with ongoing efforts to make adjustments to NCAA name, image, and likeness rules that are both realistic and modern society to higher education." So a lot of people there's both sides, saying we shouldn't pay players or we shouldn't. This is why you work hard in college so you can go to the NFL, go to the NBA, go to the MLB, whatever professional league you go into, and that's to make money. You don't go to college to make money. You go to college to get an education. But there's also other sides of people that say, hey, they get scholarships, but not all players get scholarships. For instance, for baseball, they only get allocated 11.7 scholarships for a whole team. Football, it's different. For different schools, it's different. But some say that players should get paid because they have. Yeah, while some get on scholarship, but some aren't. They have famous walk-ons such as Baker Mayfield, who I believe could have made a killing in college, I believe Gardner Minshew was walk on as well. They're not on scholarship. They don't get their tuition. They don't get their meal plans or anything like that paid for. That's all coming out of pocket. Um, so some aspects I see where, hey, it's college. Um, you try to go to the NFL to make money. You don't do that in college. You go to college to seek an education. But also part of me is like, hey, it's just only a select few players that are on scholarship that are able to, I guess you can say, get paid. But I see both sides of it. What do y'all see with this
Yeah.
Fair Pay to Play Act?
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I mean, they're there to go to college for an education. But, one of the main things that, like, I can say on my end of being a recent athlete, from middle school to even like from to middle school to college, your goals are, I mean, they're set high to make it to one of the leagues. And so, you know, and I mean, the whole point of everyone loves watching college football better than the NFL because, you know, NFL, there's a lot of players that carry themselves. Not all players, but there's a lot of players that carry themselves. You know, like, I mean, it doesn't matter. After this game, I'm getting a paycheck. So, I mean, college, they got to make a name for
Yeah,
themselves.
and
So,
there's a lot more emotion, I think, is what you're trying to say, in college football than NFL, because at the end of the day, NFL, they're getting a paycheck at the end of the season. It doesn't matter if you go 0-11, 0-16, whatever. You're still getting a paycheck at the end of the day. For college, it's like, hey, I'm trying to make it to the ranks. I'm trying to go win a national championship. Yeah, it'll be nice to win a Super Bowl in the NFL, but at the end of the day, you're still getting paid for it. I think that's what you're trying to say, Ben. But does anybody else have any other statements to say about it?
Yeah. I think I've come to understand this bill a little bit better than I had beforehand. Um, you know, like you said earlier, I think the biggest uh, thing that you can take out of it is if instead of before we just pay out players outright, um, why not let's get all the schools to be able to offer full scholarships. Because there's a lot of guys that don't get those full scholarships. You have your walk-on guys, you have your guys that get on half scholarship. So most schools and most players aren't even putting their guys on scholarships. So I think that's what needs to happen first. Um, on the other hand, uh, if they have an agent to come in and help them explore business opportunities, that has no conflict with the NCAA, so they can do that on their own. Let's look at Lewis Neal for LSU, the 6'2", 270-pound defensive lineman, owns an investment firm, owns a financial. He's a financial trader, owns an investment firm, owns a hair salon, and he's looking at getting purchasing a real estate agency. So I think in that sense, I'm for that. I totally get that. But if you're gonna just make a step in and pay players out, you know, that kind of takes away, like y'all said earlier, the competitiveness. The whole point of college is to get to the next level. So when you bring that edge, you're fighting for something when you get to college. You got to fight for your spot. You got to fight to get on the draft board. You got to fight to get your spot and get invited to the combine. And everybody wants to be a number one pick. That big rookie contract means a lot for a lot of guys. So, and then not to mention the championships. But once you get in the NFL, people get wound up, about the NFL, but it's not near as much as the emotion that goes into college football. But that's it from me.
So I believe that will do it for this edition of the Sports Rundown. Big thanks to Ben, to Tyler, for Caynan, for joining us in on this. edition of the Sports Rundown Radio. One thing I do want to point out, I say it every week, or I think I do, but big shout out to Philip Fauché. You see all these things on, and Ben Lejeune. They help run our Twitter, our Instagram. Um, they basically run the sports rundown from behind the scenes. Ben does the podcast as well, but they run the sports rundown. Me, Caynan, and Tyler. I don't want to offend anybody, but we're just on air talents. We just talk on the podcast. But big shout out to them for helping us. Um, like always. But that'll do it for this edition of the Sports Rundown. Make sure to like and subscribe. I know y'all probably didn't listen all the way through, but if y'all did, comment what y'all think about the Fair Pay to Play Act in California. But again, make sure to like and subscribe. That'll be it for this edition of the Sports Rundown Radio.